whatever conclusion you come to about people, the truth is that some people are criminals, some people are evil, some people are vicious, violent, dangerous, untrustworthy, thieving, raping, arsoning, that's burning things, murdering, kidnapping. We wouldn't have police or courts or jails if some people weren't really dangerous to the rest of us. Now, the problem of crime and the problem of dealing with people who just won't play nice is real. And whether you think people are basically good and those criminals are a result of society and poverty, or whether you think people are basically evil and those criminals have not chosen to fight against the evil within themselves, the reality is if you just play and imagine that there's no crime, everyone's wonderful, I can go into a maximum security prison and everyone will be nice to me. You'd better protect yourself in life. You'd better not walk around. This is something I learned in New York City as a kid. If you walk around like an oblivion, you're walking around like an antelope on the Serengeti plain of Africa. An antelope is a prey animal. They get eaten by predators. If you are on a city street, you definitely owe it to yourself to walk with a purpose, to look around and be aware of your environment, not to be in full peacetime, relaxed condition, but to be prepared to spot a problem and either flee it, face it, or fight it. If you act like a prey animal, the predators in human flesh will go after you and will predate upon you. If you act like a predator, the other predators will probably not mess with you. But if they do, you're going to have to basically protect yourself. But it'll be more rare than if you're acting like a prey animal. The same thing is true not just for you walking down a dangerous city street, but it's also regarding society. How do we treat criminals? Are criminals, as those of us who think human beings are basically good would have it, simply misguided, victims of social and economic inequality? Are they people that you should treat with therapy and sympathy? Or as people who think that human nature is dangerously vile, you can overcome it, but if you don't try to overcome it, it's going to be bad. Criminals need to be separated from the rest of us for our protection, and they should be punished. Punished. There's a word you don't hear in penal courses today. That's courses for people who run prisons. Punishment. No, it's all about rehabilitation. I'm old-fashioned. I tend to believe that if you have a rapist, a kidnapper, a murderer, a bank robber, somebody who does horrible things to other people, that they should be punished, and a little bit of suffering should be meted out to them to compensate them for the suffering that they've inflicted on their victims. But I'm old-fashioned. You don't have to listen to me. You certainly don't have to agree with me. That is a personal opinion. Where do you think crime comes from? You should have your own personal opinion. If crime comes from society, then it makes sense that you try to address the socioeconomic problems of poverty, inequality, maybe race, maybe gender, and you try to tweak society like good people who are reformers, who are liberals, progressives, radicals, socialists, and communists. Good people on the left want to make society better so that people will be better, because they view criminals as victims of society's problems. They also see crime as a psychological problem that can be treated. And if, even as a conservative, I have to admit there's a grain of truth in this. Because if a person chooses to change, if a person hits rock bottom and realizes that the life that they've been living is completely dead end, miserable, then they can change. If you can get a person to reform, then they won't have a recidivism problem. They won't return to their life of crime as easily. They'll have something to fight for, a better life. So I don't think that rehabilitating criminals is the wrong thing to do. And I don't think that treating the psychological problems of criminals is a bad idea. I do believe that that isn't the whole picture. And that if you treat crime simply as a social problem, not as an individual choice, then you're missing something very important about crime. And if you simply try to restore and rehabilitate criminals against their will when they personally have no interest in getting better, you're not only wasting your time, you're developing in them a contempt for the system. Punishment, on the other hand, is very clear. It shouldn't be sadistic, it shouldn't be cruel or unusual, but there should be some suffering. And I don't necessarily mean the suffering of an anarchic prison with sexual predators all over the place pouncing on you. I mean work gangs. But again, I'm old-fashioned. You certainly don't have to agree with that. But you have to think about crime, because one of government's biggest jobs is to deal with crime. Like some of you, I come from a family that includes police officers. My mom was a teacher in the Southeast Bronx, which is a war zone, and was a war zone in the 60s when she taught there. And that was the experience that the Wallingford, Connecticut Police Department chose her for, because she was tough. And in the 20 years that she was on the force, she not only had the highest conviction rate on the force of any officer, she not only had several cases argued before the United States Supreme Court that she was involved with as an investigating detective, she saved lives. But the stuff she dealt with permanently hurt her, because the stuff she dealt with were crimes that a female police detective would be assigned to back in those days. Combat veterans from World War II, Korea, and Vietnam who worked with her wouldn't touch these cases. They were too miserable, because they were cases of incest, of rape, of child molestation. They were the most horrible, intimate crimes against the most innocent of people. And for 20 years, my mom tried to save victims and help victims of crime. When you grow up in the family of a police officer and you see the pressure that that job, that dealing with the scum of the earth, the worst of the human nature has to offer, you see it play out in the life of your mom or your dad or another loved one, you have to think about crime, what it is, and what to do about it. So, in the last lecture, I encouraged you to think and develop your own opinion about human nature. Is it basically good, or is it basically evil? Is society the problem, or is human individual choice, evil choice, the problem? Today, in this lecture, I'm asking you to think about, where does crime come from and how should we treat it? All sorts of crime, because government has to do that. Now, there is a related thing to this. The first Chinese emperor, Qin Shi Huangdi, established a totalitarian police state in ancient times where there was absolutely no privacy. And they made laws about everything in the first emperor's reign, and it became a miserable life. The current Chinese Communist Party does basically the same thing. Its founder, Mao Zedong, admired Qin Shi Huangdi as his role model. So what they have established in China is what is called legalism, and various Western societies try to do it too. And legalism sets up a bunch of laws and punishments designed not only to stop crime, but to control human behavior, so that there's a rule for everything. The old Mishnah, the old Jewish scribal law, tried to do the same thing when it defined what is doing work on the Sabbath day. Lifting a bottle this heavy would be considered work by the Mishnah. And so, in Jesus' time, one of the criticisms of the Jewish faith was that it had left the point of being something passionate that dealt with the meaning of life and love and mercy, and instead it was about following a bunch of rules, which is not nearly as interesting or compelling as a religion. Do you think that we can legislate our way to a better life? Do you think that making smoking illegal, or making drinking illegal, or making drugs illegal, or making driving fast illegal, making prostitution illegal, or making eating meat illegal is the way to go? Do you think that you can make laws to control other people, and that will make the world a better place? Because what that does is it criminalizes a bunch of behavior that most people throughout history would not consider crime. What you do is you make a bunch of laws about thought and behavior, about thinking or believing the wrong thing, and suddenly a bunch of things that were problems in society are now crimes to be punished. Is that a good idea? Is legalism a good idea? The Chinese eventually said no. And in the second dynasty, the Han dynasty, they rejected legalism, they rejected all of those laws, and you end up with Confucian philosophy, which is a philosophy of social harmony. We've talked a little bit about it. In the West, even the Jews, after Christ's time, move away from the hyper-legalism of the Pharisees and move towards a religion that is much more spiritual and inward-looking. It's much more about giving comfort in a very difficult life and helping us to be good people, God's people. So in history, legalism, the idea of legislating your way towards utopia by making a bunch of things criminal acts that weren't, is something that a lot of people try. And it's something that socialists, communists, and people on the left have a tendency towards, because remember, they think people are good and society is bad. And how do you tweak society but by making a bunch of laws? So often, when people are well-intentioned and want to make a better world, and they think society is the problem, what they will do is create a legal system that is so dense it's like a spider's web and you can't move. There's no freedom. There's no liberty. There's no choice. You're just told by the law what to do, what to think, what to say, what to be. And most Americans traditionally would say absolutely no to that form of legalism. But think about human nature, think about crime and punishment, where it comes from, and think about legalism and whether criminalizing activity is a wise or an unwise move.